I'm here at the Great Philadelphia Comic Con with well-known actor Ian McElhinney. Thank you for speaking with me.
My pleasure. Delighted to talk to you and to your following.
Cool. So let's go back to the start. How did you get into acting?
I got the bug. I wasn't necessarily. I wasn't one of these kids who thought I had to be an actor. I happened by chance more than by design to end up on a stage when I was about 15. And just really enjoyed the experience, and ever from then on I thought, I like this, and what's more, I think I can do it, and I feel good doing it. So that was kind of it. I kind of felt I'm going to have to do this at some point.
So you weren't a shy guy who found himself on the stage, or you just kind of
the funny thing is, I think a lot of actors would probably accept that in life they can be or could be quite shy people. But for some reason, being on a stage or in front of a camera just makes them feel stronger, powerful, confident, and it's a strange thing. You don't know where that comes from or why, but it's just something that you feel in that environment. It doesn't intimidate you, it inspires you.
So did you say you went to school for acting?
No. Well, I did. Yes, I did. Eventually. I went to university. At this time, I was, I suppose, trying to avoid becoming an actor, if you like. I was trying to study serious subjects with a view to doing something, quote, serious in life. And I ended up, actually, I was already doing a second degree in America, as it happens, in Boston.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I happened to go to a university, Brandeis, just outside of Boston, in Waltham.
Right.
And it had, and I didn't know it at the point that I went there, it had its own theatre school. And I'd spent my undergraduate years doing lots of plays as my sort of pastime, my hobby as a student. Loved it. And I got to this university that had its own theatre school, and I wasn't in it. And I was so envious of those who were that I thought, I'm going to have to change course.
Oh, yeah.
So I did, and I ended up doing my second degree in theatre studies rather than in international politics, as it happens, so there you go.
Rather than being a diplomat, you wanted to share the word on stage.
I wanted to sort of negotiate, let's put it that way, but not diplomatic negotiation, just negotiate between my world and the audience,
Right. So where'd you end up after school? You stay in the U.S.?
No, I guess I always thought at that time that I want to be part of the British theatre, because it has a very strong tradition, and I loved theatre.
Right.
And I came back to Britain, and in fact for a couple of years, because I'd been away and I needed to find my feet, or at least I thought I did, I actually came back and taught for a few years. And then, because time was moving on, I thought, listen, you've got to move now. You're never going to move. And I went into the acting game, and it's a very weird thing. In those days in Britain, I don't know about here in the States, but in those days in Britain, you had to have the dreaded equity card. And it was almost like a closed shop. No card, no work, no card. And I was advised, if you want to get your equity card, go back to your roots. So at 30 years of age, as a lad who never imagined, to be honest, that I would be going back to live in Northern Ireland, and certainly not if I was going to pursue my career as an actor, I ended up back in Belfast to do precisely that, which at the time seemed to me a very strange thing to do, but there you go, that's what happened.
So what acting method or what type of plays did you like to do back when you were there?
The funny thing is, when I went back to Ireland at that age, my experience up to that point was I just saw myself as an actor. I loved theatre. I guess in some ways, one of the things I felt I would probably love to have spent my time doing was joining the RSC company and working there for a couple of years on classics.
Right.
As it happened, I went back to Ireland, and our situation being what it was at the time, I ended up inevitably doing an awful lot of new work, an awful lot of it to do with Irish politics and paramilitarism and what was going on in our world, so a completely different type of thing.
Right.
And in a way felt slightly trapped by the fact that as somebody who thought of himself simply as, quote, an actor, I find myself being perceived as not just an Irish actor, but a Northern Irish actor. And I did a lot of, either paramilitaries or policemen.
Ah, okay.
And I'm not complaining on one level because it was steady work. On another level, I was frustrated because it felt like I'd been put into some sort of box that I hadn't even thought about.
Yeah.
But was now sort of like encasing me, whether I liked it or not. You know. Fortunately, time passed and I broke free from that. But it took a bit of time, and initially it was a bit frustrating.
So you were typecast on the stage early on, or it
not
felt
on
like
stage, more on screen. You know,
Okay.
On stage, I was different. On stage, you could still do the full gamut of things, and I loved that. I loved the freedom of stage and the fact that stage opens you to more a variety of options. You know, screen. There's a thing with screen that sometimes, whether you mean it or not, you can get boxed into a certain type of character. I think sometimes, frankly, it's sometimes to do with lack of imagination on the part of producers, where, we've seen him as X. I'll tell you what, we'll employ him as X.
Yeah.
And you want to say, there might be an X plus 2.
Yeah.
Or there might even be a Y, but they don't think like that necessarily, But fortunately, as time has gone on, the scope and variety of stuff has, developed for me, and I'm very happy with that.
So when did your screen work start, either film or TV?
1980 was the first thing I did on screen.
Okay.
And then, I would have been in and out of stuff through the 80s and 90s. I'm probably doing more on screen in the last 15 years than I probably ever did before that. And certainly more that has a wider visibility. A lot of stuff that I would have done in the past would have been for British or Irish television.
Okay.
The world doesn't necessarily see that. A lot of the stuff I'm involved in these days has a wider sort of like public, so I guess I'm quote better known
Right.
from my screen work than I would have been before, but I've been in and out of working on camera for 40 years nearly, so.
Would you say your career has been like a gradual rise, or was there a big bump at some point that you were like, wow, this is much
to
different?
be honest, I think it's been pretty steady all the way. I wasn't one of these people who had a kind of I was not propelled into it at a young age. It just gradually developed over time. I guess there was a bit of a bump in the late 80s, a bump up in that I got a couple of back-to-back sort of TV leads, one in a series and one in a film within a year. So both of those between them would have given me a bigger visibility than prior to that.
Right.
But that said, I just carried on working really, doing this, that and the other. Until something like Game of Thrones comes along, it's very hard to know, or unless you're in the world of film, it's very hard to know what that's like, because I would have been doing a lot, and to a certain audience would have been quite well known, but to most people they wouldn't have had a clue.
Right. Yeah.
Now, and it's only because something like Game of Thrones has the world kind of visibility that it has, there's a chance that wherever you go, somebody will say, I know who you are, You would never normally have expected that or worried about that, So it is, definitely created a different sort of like level of visibility, from anything that you've done before, and so that is a change, that is a change that you just have to get used to, It's a very nice change. I'm not arguing with it, but it's a change,
So had you done much, or rather, how does fantasy and sci-fi work compared to being actual characters?
Well, the fantasy side of things is great because Game of Thrones, we play perfectly real people.
Right.
It's the world around us that, if you like, is a bit surreal, in that we do have certain extraordinary things, like with the occasional dragon turning up or the occasional White Walker or whatever.
Yeah.
or dragon glass and all that kind of thing. But, you know, most people are dealing with each other on a very practical level. Like, you know, can I get on with this person? Can I trust this person? Am I willing to support this person? Do I like this person? Whatever, you know, it's just like, you know, in life.
Right.
So it's a very normal world in that sense, and it feels very normal, you know. It's the environment that's extraordinary. All right, the sci-fi world is a bit more extraordinary again. What is, for me, I mean, on one level it's very exciting because all sorts of things are possible that may not be possible in real life, you know. What is slightly, I suppose, for lack of a better word, tedious about it is that quite a lot of these things necessarily involve special effects, green screen, CGI, etc., etc., etc. And the bottom line is those are all very practical, technical obligations which very often are in the making. They may end up for very exciting viewing, but in the making are quite tedious processes.
Right.
So there's times when you can feel a bit, just to be honest, frustrated or tired by the process. Whereas when you're just doing a scene, you know, between two or three of you, there's an energy and a dynamic in that that in itself, in the instant, is stimulating, you know. So sometimes that side of things can make the sci-fi thing, especially, you know, just a slower and more testing sort of process, if you like.
So how do you like being the costumes, props, and sets of sci-fi and fantasy versus, you know, are they fun?
I think, you know, I mean, part of the fun for any of us is dressing up in a different costume and living in a different world, if you like. I mean, that is exciting.
Okay, so you like the so you like that world that they set you in with the, you know, that stage, I mean, you know, so to speak.
As I say, dressing up in a sense is always fun.
Yeah.
If the costumes are, first of all, if they fit you well, if they look good, if they, well, they don't have to look good because you know, using a character that needs to look good, but if they fit you well and if they express the story or the world of the story properly, they give you a new dimension. You know, you can be playing a character in your street clothes, and that's one sense of it. As soon as you put on the costume that you're actually going to wear, and you get used to what it is, how it works, what it offers you, you know, it's a whole different vibe. So there's a great excitement. If you're working in a rehearsal room and then you go onto a set and you see the reality of that set, and you get used to where X, Y, and Z is, it's a whole different vibe. I mean, there's an excitement in that subliminally gives you all sorts of possibilities that you hadn't necessarily thought about before, but you just realize, oh, I can feed off this, you know, which is nice.
Did you have a sci-fi or fantasy costume that really brought something new out among the many you've worn? Or?
Well, I think, you know, obviously, you know, when you're wearing the obvious thing is obviously when you're playing a knight and you're wearing those swords, and you get used to the weight of it and drawing it out and the use of it. There's a whole kind of like sense of your body that you develop, because to use those swords is an all-body action. You know what I mean? You can't just work from the shoulder. You've got to work from your feet right through the body into the arm and out. So you get a whole sense of moving and of knowing how to move in a different way, which is very invigorating. And same with, I mean, I've done shows where you've had to pick up, I personally wouldn't be a fan of guns, but when you have to pick up a real gun with real weight, for me certainly it gives me a whole different sense of the character when you have that thing in your hand that has that power and has that substance. Because normally you might be practicing with dummies or whatever, but when you pick that up, it's a whole different vibe, you know. So there, you know, props and costumes in that sense can give you a whole different awareness of who you are, how you move, you know, who you relate to, or how people relate to you. You know.
I want to ask you about the process of acting. What's your favorite part of of the skill of the action, the activity?
You know, it's a weird one because, as I say, I personally, I was always the thing that drew me into this business was stage.
Right.
And in that sense, my generation probably very different from the young ones coming in now. I think the young ones, because they grow up with screen, they're probably all fascinated with the idea of being on screen. You know, the whole screen thing was a case of I didn't quite know how it worked, how I'd get into it, or when I'd get into it. I just assumed at some point it would happen. But the fascination for me was stage. And certainly at that point, the sensation when you're on stage and it's working, you know, of course, sometimes you can be on stage and it's not working, but if you're on stage and it's working and you know it's working, the feeling of strength that you get from the moment when you're in it is fantastic. And when you come off stage, it's like a high, you know, and I'm the kind of actor that after a show, I can't come off stage and go home and go to bed.
Yeah.
You know, I have to have a couple of jars, you know, whatever, relax and then go to bed. But I love that feeling of the live moment in front of an audience and you know this has worked. That's a great sensation. So that would be my favorite, I guess. I find more and more as time goes on, I enjoy rehearsal. I used to find rehearsal quite stressful at times. Now I think I enjoy it. On film, I guess it's fair to say all of us, when the time comes, the bit that is in some ways the most tense-making, but also the one that is the most exciting, is when you know you've got your close-ups. You know. But you know, film again, even filming a sort of a straightforward drama is again a more technical business than stage, and it's broken up here, there, and everywhere. You know what I mean? So. You know, even on a normal working day on a film set, you have a lot of downtime, waiting time, you know, killing time, you know, and then you have your moments.
Yeah.
And you've got to revel in them, you know what I mean? And as I say, when you know the camera's on you, when you know it's like this, you know, or tighter, you know, there's a thrill in that, you know.
Is there something special, unique to you about how you do your rehearsals?
You know, I suppose I can't say to you, yes, that what I do is X and that's unique. But I guess everybody has their own way of processing stuff. I know for me, that doesn't always work because sometimes you'd be throwing scripts out of left field. But for me, I like having time with the script at home and feeling that I not only know the script, but I understand how the script moves. You know, where the press points are, where you take the foot off the pedal, how it shapes if it's a speech, for instance, how it shapes. And I quite enjoy that business of personally, one-on-one, coming to terms with the material, you know. And then, you know, you go out there because you feel, all right, I think I'm in charge of my end.
Right.
How does it relate with the other people you're working with, you know?
Right.
You know?
Was there anything special with Star Wars or Game of Thrones that you did to prepare for the roles, or was it just another?
Not really. I mean, I think
kid?
my big thing is not to. It's just to stay. In a sense, it's just to stay calm enough to stay focused. Not to get too much energy going, you know, because that all you're doing is dissipating your energy.
Right.
You stay calm, so when the time comes, the energy is in the moment. You haven't blown it all away before you can get to the moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So what generally inspires your work, your day-to-day?
There's something about it. I can't explain this. I don't really know what it is. I just like doing this job. I've always liked doing this job. And if you said to me, would you rather be working or not working? I'd rather be working. And the great thing about being an actor is, unlike most jobs, you're not obliged to retire at a certain age.
Yeah.
And for myself, I don't know, time, health, who knows, I may find that I do less. Opportunity, I may do less. But I don't actually want to stop doing this job. And I guess I'll stop when I'm not fit to do it anymore. But really, at no point am I going to say, you know something, that's it. At least at the moment I'm saying that, you know, and I could officially, formally, I could be retired, but I've no intention of doing that.
So
Keep on trucking.
okay. Is there any actor that you don't know personally or haven't worked with that particularly inspires you?
You know, I've never thought like that or felt it was useful to think like that, for the simple reason that if you have to work with somebody, you kind of don't want to be too much in awe of them. You have to just work with them, get on with it, you know.
Okay.
But I do have to say, I do remember I was in Ken Brannaugh's Hamlet, and I played a small part of Bernardo, who was one of the guards on the battlements in the opening act of the play. And the captain of the guard was Marcellus. And as it so happened, I mean, Ken is famous for casting a whole host of very well-known actors and things. The captain of the guard in that was Jack Lemmon.
Okay.
And I'd always loved Jack Lemmon as a performer. So I was delighted that I was doing, most of the scenes I was doing were with Jack. And sadly, only 2 or 3 years after that, he died. But he was lovely, and it was really nice to meet him and work with him, and he was very easy to work with, you know. He's a proper actor, just, you know, he really is. So I really enjoyed that, and it's the only time that I have done, if you like, personally, a fan thing. And I said to Jack, Jack, will you do me a favor? This was the days when video cameras were still on the go, if you like. And I said, I'd love you to say hello to my wife and kids. My kids were young at the time. Say hello to my wife and kids on the video. Would you do it? He said, of course I would. So I have a tape of Jack saying hello to my wife and my children, you know.
Oh, that's pretty sweet.
And that's lovely. That's lovely, you know. And that's the only time really that I sort of, you know, felt a bit fan-like, if you like. You know what I mean? You know, so that was nice.
So are there any actors maybe you saw techniques, rehearsal, or performance that you said, oh, you stole maybe something they did, or anyone out there like that?
Yeah, well, I would put it this way. I don't know if you do direct steals. I think what happens is you watch something and you think, I love the way he does that.
Yeah.
Or I love the way, for him, that works. And then the question is, okay, it works for him. Could it work for me? And it may be that it can't. Maybe that's what he does, you know. So I think if you're watching other actors, rather than having an actor that you think, oh, I'd love to be like X, I think it's almost a case of, you know, it's even like when you get notes from a director, you never do or should act on the note like consciously in the moment. What you should do is get in your head. If you rate the note, if you think it's a good note, get it in your head, and if it's in your head, in time it will come out. But when it comes out, it will come out because you've ingrained it. Do you know what I mean? It will not be imposed.
Yeah.
You know, and I guess if you see something that somebody else is doing that you admire or something like that, well, I think it's the same sort of thing. You let it emerge when it's ready, you know, if it emerges at all.
Okay. Are you into science? Any fields of science at all?
Do you know, at the time I went through school at home, very bad system in a way. You could give up either science or art subjects at the age of 15. I gave up the science subjects because I was into, all the things I was into were arts.
Right.
At a later point in my life, I felt the loss of that. I wish I knew more about science, because I actually do find science fascinating, but I'm very ill-informed. But I find that when my kids were growing up, simply because of that, sometimes I would get kind of engrossed in their science studies, if only to help myself a bit, you know. Right. But that said, I mean, my knowledge of science would be very limited, you know. But it's kind of an area where I feel, you know, I missed out. I should have been across that a bit more growing up.
So, growing up, were you into science? I guess you weren't into science fiction, I suppose. But how about fantasy?
To be honest, if I'm being totally honest, I happen to, you know, be making my living out of these genres. I normally, personally, would not be rushing to watch either genre.
Okay, fair enough.
I like sort of, I guess, gritty dramas, you know. I wouldn't say, oh, I must watch that because it's a sci-fi or it's a fantasy or whatever. You know, it doesn't mean to say I wouldn't watch it, but I'm not rushing to it.
Right.
You know?
Okay. So I often ask this question. It might not apply, but I ask: is there when you were a kid? Is there a superpower or technical device that you wish you had? Some kind of power?
Well, the only one that I think I would love to have is the ability to fly.
Yeah, it's a popular
And that's
one.
not simply to do with Superman. You have these dreams where you feel like your legs have got huge springs and you just lift off and fly.
Yeah.
And keep gliding for an indefinite period of time and then land. It's a wonderful sensation.
Yeah.
I think I'd love to be able to fly, you know.
Okay.
I don't have to fly, you know, supersonically or miles high or anything like that. Just the sensation of being off the ground and free to move. It's the freedom, I think, as much as anything, of flight that you know, is kind of mesmerizing there.
So, sorry, I kind of drew a slight blank there.
You're all right.
Is there any project, some big project you'd love to do that you haven't done yet?
You know, not really. I mean, people have said to me in the past, oh, do you want to play X, do you want to play Y? And there's one or two jobs that I would love to have done that now I can't because I'm too old. Certain parts that I'd like to play, but I'm too old to play them now. I've never really thought like that. As long as the work is interesting, I'm quite happy to do it. Because if you desperately want to do something, the likelihood is it will not happen.
Yeah.
And there's one or two things that I didn't know I wanted to do, and I've done them, and I thought, wow, that was great. And the funny thing is, I never really thought about whether I might do that, you know?
Yeah.
But no, I mean, whatever comes along, comes along. As long as interesting things come along, I'm happy.
So what role do you think the actor has in society?
I think very important in many ways. I mean, obviously on the very base level, the very fact that we're all involved in entertaining people and hopefully making their lives a bit more enriched because they can watch X, Y, Z, and you know, it takes them away from their normal daily life or whatever. That's very important. But I also believe that, you know, in terms of making people just think out of their own particular box, a bit more theatre in particular, or certain types of film can be very, very powerful, you know. Just allowing people to think, you know, there are other worlds, there are other ways of thinking, there are certain ways of engaging with people. It just hopefully, you know, to anybody watching stuff, it helps to broaden your mind, broaden your awareness of the world, make you as an individual a bit more flexible, a bit more accommodating of others, whatever. I think all of those things can come from sort of the range of material that, you know, writers, actors are involved in generating. And in that sense, they're all very positive things.
So, apart from seeing you on screen, is there somewhere online people can find your work or, you know, see what you're up to?
You know, I'm not a social media person, really. I'm on Twitter, but I have, rather than personally being on it, I mean, I'm responsible for it, if you like, but I have somebody who does it for me.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I you know, I usually only sort of like talk actually to people who are following the kinds of things that I'm doing. I'm not somebody who's out there expressing an opinion or a point of view about things, you know.
Right.
I mean, I guess I could do it if I wanted to, but as it so happens, I'm just not bothered about doing that, you know. But that's really the only sort of engagement I have, other than just doing the work.
What's your name on Twitter?
At Ser, S-E-R, you know, at Ser Ian Mac.
Ian Mac?
Yeah,
M-A-C.
I-A-N-M-A-C.
Okay.
Capital I-A-N, capital M-A-C. At Ser, capital S, Ian Mac.
Okay. Just so no one creates an account, you know, a fake one.
Yeah, no.
Just make sure people know.
It is there. It is there. And as I say, I have quite a lot of followers, actually.
Okay.
But it's mostly handled for me, to be honest.
Okay, right. No, I understand. That's all the questions I have. Any final words or thoughts?
No, to be honest, I'm quite happy to leave it at that.
Okay, cool. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit chrisalvarez.com or theartofsciencefiction.com for more great interviews, photos, and articles. Your visits help support this podcast. Please remember that my first name, Chris, does not have an H in it. One of the best ways to provide feedback for this podcast is to rate me on iTunes. Please give me a good rating if you liked it, or feel free to give me a bad rating if you didn't. I'll use that feedback to make this a better podcast. You can also follow me on Instagram under Chris Alvarez Sci-Fi, on Facebook under Chris Alvarez WLC, on YouTube under Chris Alvarez WLC, and on Twitter under Chris Alvarez WLC. Thanks for listening and keep imagining the future.